Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast. It's great to be back here with you again, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be introducing Akash to you as a special guest that's come along to speak to you. If you listen to the podcast number 63, you'll remember me speaking to Dan Norman, and you'll remember that in that talk we were actually referring to a mutual friend of ours that we both knew through property that sadly passed away at a very young age. He was only 44. He had a young family, and sadly he had no legacy planning whatsoever. So his wife inherited a mess and inherited a lot of additional burden with a young family that took her over a year to resolve. My learning from that very, very quickly was that I needed to sort out my own legacy planning. And I'm sure there's some of you listening to this podcast now that don't have your own legacy planning in place. So I've invited Akash along to talk to you about what he does to help property investors and business owners with their legacy planning. We're not going to chat through it. I'm going to leave it for Akash to present, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a chat at the end of it. So thank you very much for joining me, and over to you, Akash.
Martin, thank you so much for having me on this podcast, and thank you listeners for tuning into this important subject. I promise you I will add some great value to you. So what I'll do is I'm going to approach this in 6 steps. The first is I'm going to start off with the vision. The second, I'm going to lay out the problem in a bit more detail. We'll talk about a strategy to try and help you guys, focus on the solution structure for that, and finally I'm going to end the talk with some do's and some don'ts. So when you start off, it's all about starting with the end in mind, and it's thinking about what will your legacy be. You're working hard now, but what are you working hard for? And it's starting to really visualize what that legacy will be. And for anyone who's read Stephen Covey's Begin with the End in Mind, he does an exercise number 7 in the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And we're just going to do that very, very briefly now. So if you're listening and you can, and you're not driving, I'd say close your eyes or just visualize. Just picture yourself walking into a chapel for a funeral service. You see friends, family, colleagues, and as you get closer to the casket, you realize it's your funeral. And then 4 people get up and start to speak. A family member, maybe your spouse, a child or a sibling, a friend, a work colleague or business associate, and each of them give a short eulogy. Now, what Covey asks is, what would you want each of them to say about you? This is really powerful stuff. This helps you craft your legacy. What kind of person were you? What difference did you make? And more importantly, what legacy did you leave behind? So we're going to start talking about how we can help create your legacy. And the reality is, just like Martin said, is if you don't take the time to craft this legacy, you will leave chaos and carnage behind, which unfortunately your family have to deal with. So that was the vision, and do take some time to think about what you want your vision to be. The second is, what is the problem? What is the problem that we're dealing with? So let's talk about wealth. Wealth in Latin is a more holistic meaning. It's not just money the way we treat it nowadays. So wealth is money, your health, and your family, right? So when you're young, you try to build your money, you've got your health, and you're working towards building a family. The problem is, wealth is a game of 2 halves. The first is creating wealth, where a lot of people get stuck and they never actually make it into the second half. The second is, when you've got a family, you've got some money, you really need to defend this now. You need to build a financial fortress. And what that means, if anything happens, you guys are still safe. And the best way I describe this as an analogy is, has anyone played Snakes and Ladders? Any of the listeners played Snakes and Ladders? Hopefully you did as a kid. It was a great game. And the whole aim of Snakes and Ladders is you got to get to the top of the board, right? You climb the ladders. The problem is no one watches out for the snakes, and that's the analogy we use. Everyone plays the game with a blindfold on. So what are the snakes in real life? The snakes are illness, death, divorce, disputes, if you get like cancer, really, really big, big issues that people need to kind of open their eyes to. And what I'd encourage listeners to do is just, here's a quick checklist, 4 elements. And the first is, do you have power of attorney? For those of you who don't know what power of attorney is, it gives someone that you nominate the ability to make decisions on your behalf if you become incapacitated. So you've had a stroke or you become mentally incapacitated. And statistically speaking, nowadays, you are more likely to become incapacitated before you pass away. So how many of you have power of attorney? So some of you probably saying, no, need to sort it. Some of you saying, yeah, I've got that one. So great. Second one is a will. Third one is life insurance. And the fourth one is essential repository. And I'm going to go into each of these in more detail, but it's worth you taking stock of where you are, and we're going to help you build a plan as we go along. So some of the statistics in the UK, only 1 in 6 people have a valid will. So even if you've got one, you need to review it. If you've named someone, is that person still correct? 65% have no life insurance. And life insurance is really, really important because it provides liquidity for your family or yourself when you need it most. 80% have no power of attorney. Only 6% of life insurance policies are written into trust. For those who are coming up to inheritance tax thresholds, what that means is any payout would go into your own name, and therefore you could be taxed 40% potentially on it straight away. And finally, 73% of families struggle to access documents when someone dies. It becomes a big treasure hunt. And why this is really important for me is I've helped you think about your vision, but this became a sober reality for me. In 2006, this is my story that I'm going to share. I was sitting next to my father, happily joking around, watching TV, and suddenly he started speaking funny. And I was like, Dad, stop being silly. You're just joking around. But it wasn't later until my mom came home. She called the ambulance straight away that I found out my dad was actually having a stroke at that point. So we went to the hospital. When he came back, we couldn't look after him. He couldn't walk. Half his body was paralyzed. So he was placed in a care home over an hour away. It was hard. We just wanted him closer towards us. There was a care home just across the road. We asked if he could move, and the care home said, yeah, of course you can. And they asked my mum if she had power of attorney to make decisions on my dad's health. My mum just broke down. She tried to explain that she'd been asking my dad to get this sorted for years, but it was always pushed back. One thing after another, never urgent until it was. But now, sadly, it was too late. And they said, sorry, there's nothing we can do, decision denied. My mum did the best she could. She started ringing around, sorting things out. She let the banks know what happened. She called his work. She tried to keep everything afloat. But here's the problem. She had no idea where anything was. She had no login, so she couldn't access his computer. No details, no clear record of what accounts existed or where the money was going. Any of this sound familiar? About a month later, she went to the cash machine to withdraw some money. Card declined. Computer says no. She tried another, swallowed by the machine. Now she's panicking, holding us together at home, part-time income earner, and now she can't get the money we need. She calls the blank to explain the situation, and that's when it happens. We're sorry, we can't give you access unless you have power of attorney. That was a second big shock. This one missing form, this one missing piece of the puzzle was now the difference between us surviving as drowning as a family. That's when it hit me. We weren't just grieving, we weren't just caring, we were flying blind with no safety net. You'd think that would be enough for one family to go through. But 2 years later, my dad unfortunately had a heart attack and passed away. He didn't look after his health. Unfortunately, this was inevitable. We were devastated. But even in the middle of grieving, the practical fallout started again because he didn't have a will. At first, we thought it'd be simple. We're his immediate family, right? His wife, his sons. But that's when the vultures started to circle. Family members who'd we'd grown up with, shared dinner with, suddenly suggesting they had a claim to his estate, including our family home. It was like a second loss. not just losing him, but now fighting to keep the roof over our heads. And it got worse. There was a mortgage on the property, and we had no idea how much. My mum, a part-time teaching assistant, was now asked to carry that burden on her own. No will, no power of attorney, and worst of all, we thought there was no life insurance either. She was in bits trying to grieve, trying to parent, and now trying to figure out how to keep the house. We genuinely didn't know if we were going to lose it. However, at the very last minute, we found a lifeline. By sheer luck, we found my dad did have a life insurance policy, but it only covered a proportion of the mortgage, leaving a huge gap behind. And the reason for this is my dad took a further advance out on the house to do some works, which he never topped up in the life insurance. The life insurance was a small lifeline, but it didn't take away the stress, it didn't bring clarity, and it didn't change the fact that we almost lost everything. But here's a question I keep asking myself. Why? Why did this all happen? Was my dad careless, selfish, a bad guy? Not at all. It came down to two main things, and it's the two same reasons I see day in, day out with the families I work with. The first is he didn't think it was a bad idea. He just never made it a priority. My mum was always hounding him to sort it out, but like most people, it was always something he would get to one day until one day it was too late. And secondly, he didn't have the blueprint. He had bits and pieces, a life insurance policy here, a few things filed there, but when we needed it most, it didn't work because it wasn't part of a joined up plan. And the reality was my dad left us chaos. And at my dad's funeral, it was hard not to feel a little bit of resentment at the mess he left behind. And that was his legacy. And for the listeners, let's make sure that's not your legacy. The impact and the fallout of what happened with my dad was £2,000 trying to access my dad's bank account because we didn't have power of attorney, £50,000 that we paid our cousins out of court to keep the property, and £300,000 mortgage my mum had to take on. That's £352,000 financial detriment to my family. And that's outside of the stress and the time we will never get back. So there's three levels of security that people can have. The first is again, a person playing snakes and ladders with a blindfold on. You're trying to focus on the ladders, but you're just not even looking out for the snakes. So you're playing the game blind, which is not a good idea. The second is where you've got these ladders that you think are going to work, like my dad did, but they're broken. When you put weight on it, they snap. And they're false ladders, I call them. And the third, where we try to help clients get to, is fully black box level protected, where you don't have ladders, you have escalators to help you get to the top, and a GPS system that helps you navigate around the snakes. So if we move on to the solution for everyone is to have a plan, and a plan that sits inside your very own black box and a central repository. And when we talk about this black box, there's two elements. Imagine the foundation and then the structure above. The foundation is death planning. Death planning is, should something happen to you or your partner, you've got a death plan in place. So the wills, the powers of attorney, and life insurance. Once you've done that, if you've got an inheritance tax liability, then move on to looking at what you can do about inheritance tax. We've got far too many people focusing on inheritance tax, and they haven't even had some death planning done. So make sure you don't skip the gears. So in terms of the black box, there's four pillars to focus on. The first is life insurance, which I want to take you through. The second is power of attorney. The third is will, and the fourth is wills and trusts. So pillar number one is the life insurance pyramid, and it is a pyramid with 4 steps. At the bottom, it's personal protection. Second level is family home. Third is income, and fourth is inheritance tax planning. The reason why personal protection is first at the bottom, it protects you and your partner as the income earners. And you know, like they say on a plane, they say, put your gas mask on before you put your kids on. It's exactly the same. So what 3 elements make up the protection pyramid? Level 1. First question you want to ask yourself is, what if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? How will I pay my bills? What is your plan? If you are living off the steam, which means you have an income that automatically comes through that can pay for your expenses, this is not a problem for you. However, for the majority of people, we're still working towards getting there, and therefore you need a plan for income. And one of them is income protection. The second is critical illness, and that's one quite dear to my heart after what happened to my dad. We've raised quite a bit of money at Get Up and Give Back at Property Entrepreneur, because that is a very, very topical subject. And the reality is 1 in 2 people in their lives will get cancer, and unfortunately 1 in 3 people will have some sort of heart disease. So that's heart attack or stroke. So what is your plan should this happen to you, in terms of being able to pay the bills, in terms of having the liquidity to pay for care, maybe having to adapt your home? It's a question to take away. And the final one is private medical, with over 7.35 million on the NHS waiting list, which is just getting worse by worse every day. What is your plan to get healthcare fast and with whom you want, when you want? So one of the quick ones is private medical. So I've got it with Vitality. One day I was monkeying about with my kids, which I do a lot, and we went to American Ninja Warrior, and I was traversing with the overhang and I pulled my shoulder. And again, it's about being proactive. That same day, I had a chat with the GP who referred me to my physio because they know me. I've spent a lot of time with them. 6 sessions later, and I am back up and running, monkeying about again. So private medical is also one to consider. Level 2 of this protection pyramid or life insurance pyramid, very, very simple. If you've got a debt on your family home, if you do not cover that, you will be leaving that to your partner or your kids, or worse, your house will be repossessed. You don't want to leave that behind. Simple thing, get decreasing term life insurance, very, very affordable. If you've got £200,000 mortgage, get a £200,000 life insurance policy. Simple. Level 3 is a great one. So if you are a property investor or you have buy-to-let properties, we call this the golden goose. You have the option of covering the debt of your portfolio. So you leave that money to your kids in trust. When you pass away, they have that money, the property's passed to them, they pay off the debt, and they've now got unencumbered property portfolio, kicking out money for generations to come. So again, one thing I should have mentioned right at the beginning, which I'm going to mention now, is we are FCA regulated, so none of what I'm saying, it should be constituted as advice. Do go speak to a professional. I'll have my details in the show notes if you want to run through your situation in more detail. Finally, level 4 of the insurance pyramid is where you've got inheritance tax liability. So at the bottom, you didn't have enough money. At the top, you've got too much. And the reality is, I always ask my listeners or my audience, who's your favorite child if you've got children? But the reality is, if you don't plan for inheritance tax, you may be paying more money to the government than you are your own children. So you need to plan for that. And we can help you. We've partnered with accountants to check what your inheritance tax liability is and then plan. So one thing you can do is, again, this is not advice, you can use whole of life. So if you know you've got inheritance tax liability, a lot of people don't know this, but I'm going to quickly explain what happens when you pass away and bring that back down to whole of life. When you pass away, an executor is brought in to value your estate. At that point, they need to report to HMRC of what the value was and submit an IHT 400 form.
Just jumping in to make sure that you've got everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you'll have heard me talk about other property investors that I'm currently working with or have worked with in the past. And so I wanted to ensure that you can find out how you can actually work with me. And the best place to start with that is my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. On there, you'll find details of training courses that I run. You'll find details about my community and also how you can work with me on a one-to-one basis when you are progressed far enough down the line. And then if you're not really sure what's right for you and how we can work together, then there's a button at the top. Just hit the button at the top that says book a call. It's absolutely free. It will take you to my diary, find a slot, and we'll be able to talk in the next couple of weeks. Remember, the website is refurbishmentmastery.com. I really look forward to helping you with a successful delivery of all of your projects. Now back to the podcast.
At that point, you have your next of kin or the estate or the executor has to pay the inheritance tax bill, if they don't, your assets do not get distributed. And this is what a lot of people miss. You don't want your family left in limbo. So one of the things you can do is a whole of life insurance policy that pays out when you die rather than if you die, and it's ready there for your next of kin to pay off the inheritance tax bill and get the assets, your inheritance, as you truly intended. You don't want it blocked. And the main thing that this whole of life insurance policy does is it moves money from your estate, which is everything owned in your own name, into a trust. Imagine the same as owning personal property in your own name versus owning property in a limited company. You get much more better protection in a limited company than you do in your own name. And that's what we do with life insurance. You put in trust. Another life insurance policy you can do is get relevant life. For people who like tax effective, I'm hoping everyone here does, is it's a policy that your business can pay. Your business is the policy owner. It pays into a life insurance policy called Relevant Life. Upon death, your family requests that money from a trust, so you borrow it, and they can use that funds as they wish. So really, really important, Relevant Life. So that was pillar number one, the life insurance pyramid. The second pillar is power of attorney. So power of attorney, you get two types. You get finance and property, and you get health and well-being. So I've got two. I've got one, which is finance and property, and I've got the second one, which is health and well-being. So if I pass away, or not pass away, sorry, if I become incapacitated, my wife, Samira, can make decisions on my property. She can make decisions about my bank account. And conversely, if I was on my deathbed and I was on life support machine, my wife can make the decision whether to keep me going, what kind of treatment I have, what kind of food I eat. So really, really important, again, because we are more likely to become incapacitated than we are to pass away. So a very simple one, power of attorney in pillar number two. Pillar number three is wills and trusts. And really, what I always say about wills and trusts is it's about asset distribution, and it doesn't need to be a Hollywood movie. We've all seen that Hollywood movie where the whole family get around this big table waiting for this speaker to announce where all these assets are going to go and everyone hoping for some inheritance. That's not reality. The reality is it goes to your partner, and if you've got kids, it goes to your kids. But if you do not have a will, or you do not have an up-to-date will with the correct beneficiaries, executors, or guardians named, then you're basically leaving it up to family infighting, which is what happened with my dad when he didn't do that. So asset distribution, make sure you get a will, make sure it's up to date. And the key points to consider for that are who's going to be your executor, that's the person who's going to be responsible for distributing your estate. And the second is who are your beneficiaries. And both important roles, but again, keep reviewing them. You want to make sure the relationship is still there. You want to make sure that person's still alive. You want to make sure that person's still got capacity. I know one person who named their parents as executor, and their parents passed away, and then the will had no executor in there. So important to make sure it's up to date. The final point is for those who have children, is if you and your partner pass away at the same time, which does and can happen, without naming a guardian in a will, your children can end up into care, and social services will decide who is best placed to look after your children. So if you don't have any other reason to get your will sorted out, make sure you do it to ensure that your kids have proper care when they're gone from someone they know, someone they love. So that's the will. When it comes to trusts, I'm not going to go into too much detail because everyone's situations are quite complicated, but there are 5 common threats to wealth. And that is, again, if you own assets personally. So the first is divorce. If I pass away and my wife remarries, if she then gets divorced, her partner can claim 50% of all of her assets, which are my assets, until I passed away. The second is if my wife went into care, any assets held personally would be part of being means tested, and she may be forced to sell the family home. Inheritance tax is generally payable at this first level, but if it was in a trust for the kids won't have to pay it. The fourth is bankruptcy. So if my wife's got a business, which she does, and that becomes insolvent, they could come for her personal assets. If we left stuff in a trust, you cannot touch that. And the final one is sideways disinheritance. So if my wife in future, or my wife, say my partner has kids from a previous marriage, if I pass away and all my assets go to her, there's nothing stopping her to just pushing it towards her kids rather than my kids. So those are the 5 threats to wealth. And moving on to pillar number 4. Pillar number 4 is your black box repository. So upon death, it should not be a treasure hunt. If anyone's seen the movie Goonies, the Goonies was a fun treasure hunt movie where everyone wanted to get to the pot of gold. But what I see day in, day out is when someone passes away, family members trying to find a will, trying to find life insurance, trying to find practical details of what their estate looked like. And it really does not need to be like that. What you're doing when you do that is you're leaving a financial maze behind for people to try and unpick, and it doesn't need to be like that. So the contents of your black box need to be your life insurance pyramid, your powers of attorney, wills and trusts, and a black book. So in your black box, you have a central repository with all of your important information. So I'm now going to move on to the last part of this, which is do's and don'ts. So do review annually. This is not set and forget. I've got some clients who are on black box version 2.0 or 3.0. Things change. They've got kids, their assets and liabilities change. Please do review it annually. The second is plan for inheritance tax. Again, without planning for inheritance tax and you are over the threshold, your assets will not be released unless that's been paid. The third one sounds crazy. Talk to your family. My dad's generation, they did not talk about money. And, again, like I talk about the financial fog, we had no idea. But talk about your finance, not your finances, but when I pass away, go to the black box. When I pass away, do you want to look after the portfolio? Because there's a lot of people who I've spoken to where their children said, no, Dad, I don't want your property portfolio. I've seen how much hassle you've gone through. I don't want the hassle. I just want the money. It just really gets you to start thinking about what you're doing this for and what your kids are going to do. So talk to your family. The fourth is get advice. There is no one size fits all, and there are many types of trusts which are just seen as tax reduction, which is not the case. Everything has its pros and cons. So you want to go into this with your eyes wide open. So get advice. Always happy to help. And finally, is don't skip the gears. Too many people go in to try and mitigate IHT and they don't even have a correct will or nothing in place from death planning. Get your death planning first before you move on to life planning. So Martin, I'm going to come to the kind of end of this. I really think this is an opportunity for listeners to think about what is your legacy, which most people in this busy day and age do not think about. They're just go, go, go. They're too busy thinking about the first half of their game. We want to help you take your blindfold off and protect and craft a legacy. What we can do is we can help people get your own black box done in as little as 6 weeks. We've got a structured program. And even before you get to that, we've got an offer for you guys, specifically for Martin's podcast, is we will do a free 30-minute gap analysis. So regardless if you want to get your black box sorted yourself or you want us to help you, it's a call where we will go through your situation in detail and identify the key snakes, keeping the snakes and ladders analogy, and review your 4 pillars, find out where the gaps are, and you get a full tailored report at the end. At the end, you get to go and do it yourself, or if you want help, we can talk to you about the 6-week program. It's an absolute no-brainer. So I'll leave you with one closing sentiment before we go into the kind of questions. Is Dan Norman, a good friend of mine, and actually the partnership manager of the Black Box, he's got a saying, which is, it's better to get this done 10 years too early than 1 minute too late. I hope that was helpful. We'll put my notes in the show notes. Martin, how was that? Any questions you want to discuss any bits further?
Yeah, that was great, and really, yeah, for me, because and I'm not saying I've got all of this in place, but I've got a lot of it in place, and I was in that position where a very good friend of mine, a business partner of mine, passed away, and left his family in the mess. and I was, because because we hadn't quite formed a business at the time, I wasn't involved with it. I was on the periphery, but I saw immediately what had happened, and effectively I'd been in the same position as your dad, saying, "Oh, we'll do it. It's not the biggest priority. We've got to do other things." And we kept putting it off. And literally, I think within 8 weeks of Paul passing away, we had we'd certainly had a meeting with an advisor, and we'd started moving things through. So, as much as I kind of saw it, from the other side, I've always said to other people since, this could so easily have been a different story. It could have been me, and it would have been Sarah, my wife, struggling to sort things out. And no one wants that. And as I say, Paul was a young fella. He had a young family. They'd lost their dad and suddenly inherited all of these properties that no one in the family knew anything about. And the last I heard was they just sold the lot to
Yeah.
walk away from the problem when there was possibly other solutions for that. So yeah, I can't emphasize enough the importance of what Akash has been talking about here. And I've made a number of notes, but the one big takeaway I've made actually is review annually, because we pretty much have set and or sat and forgotten, and that was now back in 2016. So review annually. We haven't even managed to review once a decade at the moment. So I think there's a good tip in there, if nothing else. But some great advice there for for everyone listening. And don't put this stuff off, guys, because as Akash says, you don't know when that bus might come round the corner, and you don't even know what the bus is looking like. My partner Paul had not apparently had any symptoms, and then one day had a massive heart attack in the shower, and that was it. No clues, no symptoms, no evidence there was a bus coming along. It just turned up one morning at 8 o'clock. So yeah, a little bit of a sobering point, and a podcast that's very much off topic from the normal refurbishment and conversion and building related topics that I talk about and the other guests come along and talk about. But it just came out really from the conversation, as I say, I had with Dan Norman a few months back about how important this is, and the reminder that for me, it's closer to home really because of what happened to my partner Paul and his wife this was back in 2016 now. So yeah, I also just take you right back to the very beginning was what Akash was saying about the visioning, the bit that Stephen Covey talks about, visioning, effectively walking into your own funeral. What would you expect people to, or what would you want people to be talking about you in the eulogy, and even if that's nothing to do with the black box and your legacy, what actually do you want to be remembered for? And and that goes back to your property investing, your developments, your conversions, and bigger things beyond. So just for those that don't get a chance to read the cover notes, Akash, what's the best way of getting hold of you to arrange the free 30-minute call?
Yeah, so the best way is we've got I'll send either a link or a code, but I if you can't get to the code, just email me. It's akash@onpointmortgages.com. That's akash@onpointmortgages.com. But the best way is booking that 30-minute call. It doesn't cost you anything. It identifies your gap. It's up to you what you do at that point. You can take it away, but it's your first step into creating that legacy. Highly, highly recommend it.
I'm obviously the same for me as well. I would highly recommend it. What's the point in passing up an opportunity to at least understand your own situation or your family's situation? Because it's not obviously just you, you're helping your whole family, children as well, even though the children may not be old enough to understand and be engaging in the process right this moment, you are considering their longer term future. So That's it. I don't think there's any real questions. I think a little bit of a sobering point for some people, and well done for presenting it in a more light-hearted way, but whilst getting the salient points over. That is a tough thing to talk about. It reminds me of when I talk to people about the importance of health and safety on site. No one wants to talk about someone being killed on a building site, but unfortunately it does happen, and we have to be realistic about this stuff. So yeah, thanks very much for joining me, Akash. It's been really good having you here, and I know we'll see each other going forward, because as Akash touched on, we're both in the property entrepreneur program, so we do see each other there on a regular basis, and look forward to hearing that some of my listeners have actually taken Akash up on his offer of that 30-minute call. The details will be in the show notes, and I encourage you to book them to book the call as soon as I can. I think this podcast is going to go out shortly before Christmas, so wouldn't that be a really good thing to put on your list of tasks for January 2026 to actually follow this up and take a call? Thanks very much for joining me, Akash, and all the best, and we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.